Welcome back, 4 o'clock. I hope those of you who enjoy a siesta got a siesta. Those who don't care, I don't know about you.
This isn't Southern Europe.
Yeah. Good. So this morning we had a masterful introduction to this question of political theology, and found in that lapidary formulation, political theology, theological politics, the context for a very clear distinction of how people have thought through the relation between politics and theology. Much more could have been said, but I think we have a very solid grounding to approach how Illich thinks about the relation between politics and theology. And the reason why we thought of this title for today, at 4 o'clock now, Living the Catastrophe, I did not want to use the term apocalypse because there are at least two senses in which one could use the word. The one is theologically freighted, and thinks of horsemen and death and disease. So to avoid that, I thought we could start by talking about the catastrophe, which at least invokes or evokes in English a sense of an event or events of a dire kind. Living the catastrophe is not living in the catastrophe, it's living it. And I think to get a sense of that modality of being, we have two formal interventions, and then we'll have a conversation with those present. Carl Mitcham, who's, all of you know, philosopher of technology officially, but much more unofficially, spent years on this question of technology. Now, as I introduced him yesterday, teaches Chinese philosophers about technology, science and technology, and so is uniquely placed to think through the question of technoscience, its history, role, and significance in Western civilization and all of civilization. And looming behind that is climate change, and the sense of doom that suggests. Trent Schroyer, and I said this yesterday and it bears repetition, I think, spent many years in the trenches of economics, fighting it, clarifying it, changing it, thinking it through, showing its limitations epistemologically, practically, and I think we'll pick up the question of the catastrophe in political economy. Questions of an exacerbating income inequality is simply the surface or the first step of a far deeper illness, if you want to use that term, in the field of economics and on the question of economic living, life. And I think Trent will help us get a sense of that. Living the catastrophe technoscience, living the catastrophe political economy, and then we'll open it up for a conversation with David and Wolfgang and Joey and all of us to clarify what happens after we get a sense of what's going on. Right? With that said, Carl, perhaps you could start and then Trent can pick up the story. Certainly. Trent, there's a sense in which the talk just now given was so provocative and charged that some people would like to ask a bunch of questions now and then we'll come. Is that all right? Or I think we'll just take a few questions and then move on for those people who want to ask immediate questions.
Does Borremans himself give any suggestions? That is, both these titles, in a way, lift from him any responsibility to come up with alternatives.
Yeah. He struggles with it.
Yeah.
But no, he doesn't.
He doesn't?
No, he doesn't.
Okay. Do you find that strange? I mean, he had 1,200 pages.
It's actually, all the references are on the web too, so there's the publisher said I can't do it all. No, I don't, because I feel the same, I feel caught in the same thing. I don't really.
Well, you know Paul Hawken?
Yeah, yeah.
He has a new organization.
Mm-hmm.
It's called Drawdown. And on his website, he has, I think, 100 or so alternatives to reduce carbon.
Yeah.
And he's collected this group of people from all over the world to partition this set of alternatives and begin to work on it. So I wonder if Volman ever ran into Paul Hawken.
I don't, I mean, I haven't read every single page, cover to cover, but I don't remember.
Is he in the bibliography?
I didn't look.
Okay.
He does have a good index.
Yeah.
Incidentally, Sajay, your book doesn't have any index. That's a real mistake.
Yeah.
And if your publisher were here, it was his fault. He should have. It's the publisher's responsibility for a book like that, an important book, to pay the small amount of money it would have taken.
Yeah.
You could hire a professional indexer for that book for $300. If he told me, I would have paid it.
Yeah, I would.
But that's a loss.
All the publishers I know charge the author.
Yeah, I know, but they're wrong. They shouldn't do that. But if he said that I can't pay it,
Yeah.
I would have written him a check.
Let them charge you bond.
What's that?
Said let them charge you bond.
Right.
Maybe we can get it done for the paperback.
Absolutely.
That would be a real addition.
Absolutely, yeah.
Again, I have a professional indexer who I hire, and I will pay her to do it.
Done. You're on paperback.
Wouldn't.
Trent. I don't want to. I don't want.
Can I respond to Carl, or did you want to start the next section?
A response to Carl, then we will start the next.
Okay, a couple of things. I think it's absolutely true that Ivan can be understood as a modernist, and I think if you're very careful with your definitions, he can also be understood as a romantic. But I would want to be very careful with my definitions. And I took a 20-page section of the book on that subject because it was too long already, like the sermons. The second thing is about the positive. I know negative and positive are probably slightly inept words, but do we stay with them?
Yeah.
It seems to me, as I tried to say to David, who was here, oh, there he is, this morning, he's not in the business of the positive.
That's what Mark said.
But here's an excuse for Ivan. The way he lived with us was a constant demonstration of the positive. The friendships that exist in this room are evidence of that. So in the way he lived with us, that was nothing but positive. The written work was only a prolegomena to a way of life that was for others to devise, for others to live as they would, but that's just a short response.
Yeah, no, and I agree with you, but it seems to me that creates problems, and it allows projections in ways that, I mean, Machiavelli was only clearing the ground. You know, you said clear brush whacker. That's what Marx thought himself. That's what Nietzsche thought. That's what Rousseau thought. We don't want to restrict freedom of what they might do, but that allows them to be co-opted.
Well, Ivan's ideas
And
were never co-opted.
a good historian would recognize that. You said, you know, he wanted people to read Gerhard Ladner. to recognize the depth of history. But this kind of thing happens over and over again in Christianity too.
Right.
And
But if a limit is accepted, if a roof be accepted, which it has to be, I'm not saying, but let's say that was what he argued for. You establish maximums, and within that, you can screw up. He never said people would screw up. There was a certain element, there was a certain fate in human ingenuity also in him, right? But I think the roof creates the space for ordinary human fallibility without catastrophic consequences. Yeah, you understand what it's mean.
Good. Yes, last, and then we'll talk to Trent. Yeah.
Okay. Your second example with Borremans is a little bit, you would question Illich's rejection of taking the future in account at all. And I, of course, was reminded because I was 2 weeks ago together with Jean-Pierre Dupuis, who is an Illichian in some way, and who wrote, is writing for 2 decades now, Enlightened Catastrophism. So he has the exact opposite.
enlightened doomsday.
Yeah, enlightened doomsaying. So we have to assure that the catastrophe is coming in the future for sure, in order to scare us so much that hopefully we do something that in the end it will not happen. That's so very roughly. So when I read the passage I quoted this morning, I also thought, well, this would exclude the enlightened catastrophism as it is recommended by Jean-Pierre Dupuis, which would be dangerous because in some way we need to scare ourselves in order to really realize what's going on. But when I'm together with Jean-Pierre, and he makes this claim of catastrophism very strongly, and he did it 2 weeks ago, also with a full endorsement of the Catechon, then I also, as a theologian, think this is a little bit too much, because in the Christian tradition you can get it with Augustine and others, and even in the first letter of the Thessalonians, they very much emphasize absolute security in this world is not possible. So therefore, I read Illich's warning to take the future into a planning grasp or whatever as an important warning if we do this kind of enlightened catastrophism, that we are also, so in some way we have to take care of the future, but also in a detached way, or in a way not overdoing it. I mean, we have today developments, the surveillance state. We have a doomsday machine in our two doomsday machines in our world because we want to create security. So certain types of really getting all the things in our hands and make it absolutely secure create a very dangerous totalitarianism. You can even, because you mentioned Hobbes, say the philosophy of Hobbes is to try to create security, but maybe we lose our air to breath when we have this kind of tight system. So therefore I think we have to be in between Dupuis, and we have to read Dupuis with what is it called if you buy medicine in the United States or everywhere? You have always a text.
Side effects.
Side effects, yeah. So you have to read, you have to engage in Dupuis' enlightened catastrophism with this writing of Dupuis as a warning, and maybe the other way around.
Well, maybe Wolfgang all authors should supply that.
Sorry?
Not just an index, but a list of side effects. Possible side effects from their book.
Counterindications.
It reduced the number of books.
We'll turn the floor over to Trent and then rejoin that conversation which began with.
I'm going to go in a different direction. First, I want to correct a couple of
claims. I am not an activist, I am an organizer of international events. I've been very fortunate in being able to work with citizens organizations all over the world for the TOES events. But before that, I was a neo-Marxist. And when I first met Illich at a Eastern economics situation where he talked, and I was a commenter, and I made the point that his concept of freedom was an individualization of freedom that was totally inappropriate to a wider context. And he loved it. He grabbed me afterwards and said, "You must join our group." And he was thereafter incredibly accommodating to me, reading my books and reading my essays. I have an essay on the corruption of freedom in America, which he sent to all kinds of people in Germany. And my first book, The Critique of Domination, which was a very popular and successful book. He loved it, and I don't know why. I am an organizer, not a direct activist, although I work with activists all the time. Secondly, it's a miracle that I'm here, because I've had a hell of a week, and I didn't have time to do the details for this. I've been writing a book about Illich for a long time, and I keep going around in circles, and I finally ended up with the claim by Romano Giorgini that modern science is a non-natural reality of the natural. And my colleague at the graduate faculty of the New School, well, before I get started there, a lot of the history of Marxism is completely incomplete with Nietzsche and Marx. I mean, the Frankfurt School really continues this critique. With Jürgen Habermas, you get a very, very nuanced and very sophisticated critique of Kant. And it is much more, the Anglo-American world is very ignorant of the Frankfurt School, and particularly of Habermas, whose work I think is outstanding. However, what I'm going to do today is not Habermasian. It's something different. I start with Hannah Arendt, who, in The Human Condition, talks about the unnatural turning loose of the natural. The unnatural turning loose of the natural. And that begins with earth alienation and continues with unregulated markets, but unregulated situations. And the articulation of that position by Arendt, I cannot reproduce it right now, so I'm going to read a couple of paragraphs. In the origins of modern science, a conviction emerged that the human species had established itself as universal beings who can reason beyond the limits of terrestrial nature and use universe-wide laws for the guidance of terrestrial actions. Hannah Arendt calls this belief in the technical transcendence of the earth alienation, and sees it as the most fundamental revolution of modernity. It takes for granted that this is a necessary transcendence for access to nature's reality, but is also conducive to forgetting the primacy of the biospheric realities. With the transformation to universal science, terrestrial and celestial phenomena were united mathematically. Newton's synthesis, made possible by the algebraic treatment of geometric relations, jettisons the age-old common sense distinction between earth and sky. With this mathematical formalization, the last vestige of the terrestrial qualitative differences were abstracted away, and the phenomenal appearances of the earth were reduced to secondary qualities. Nature as universal facticity is reduced to a scientifically measurable, and these constructions are taken for the real. And I contest this deeply. I'm really suggesting that Romano Giordini, who was a teacher of Illich and of Pope Francis, and Hannah Arendt knew him. So it was a perspective that has had quite a history. If you think about modern science, there is an unfinished critique of modern science to start with medicine. The medical allopathic medicine is completely intolerant of energy medicine, completely intolerant of somatic medicine. Even when somatic medicine can meet the standards of double-blind research, it is just completely eliminated. Just like Wikipedia gets rid of all scientific status of somatic energy medicine. There's an incomplete critique of this kind of earth alienation. And the second dimension that Arendt mentions in the unnatural turning loose of the natural is unregulated markets. Polanyi, for example, is very concrete about the blocking of long-distance trade within the Shire, within the region, and his history of trade is quite clear. With neoliberal, although in the beginning with the Bretton Woods institutions, with the World Bank and the IMF and GATT, and which eventually became the World Trade Organization, there's already a set of operating principles which anticipate neoliberalism. But neoliberalism from 79 to 2008 was really a armed corporate globalization that resulted in the destruction of, well, I guess I should have started with Mossadegh in '54 in Iran, but certainly Chile and Argentina and so forth. I don't have the details. I would have picked them out if I had had enough time. But the transnational corporations have now become a form of global domination that we do not recognize as part of our everyday life. And for example, Peter Thiel, who talked at Trump's inauguration. Peter Thiel wrote the book From Zero to One, and it very clearly states competition is for losers. I recommend Peter Thiel's From Zero to One to recognize the modern mentality and the Republican idea of the blocking of regulations was the notion that you had to put regulations into a self-regulating framework that was consistent with the market mechanism, so that the transnational corporations were and are an incredible set of monopolies who have incredible power over us. Perhaps the most important one that most people don't recognize is Silicon Valley, because we assume they're liberals. I have a much different point of view about that. In the telecom market, is 78% of it is dominated by 3 firms. And if you ever look closely at the Google algorithms, they are very misleading for me. In my region, as I try to find out about something, I use Google, and on the 10th, about the 10th entry, I found something that might be useful, because they have their own frameworks for getting rid of anything that's critical. It's quite, so the digital technologies are universally present, and they are replacing intellectual property with any kind of other form, so that the current problems of the corporations, large corporate debt, and the reality that the economy right now is 27% of the employees are really in the gig economy. They have no secure benefits. They have no secure job. And in fact, the projection is in 10 years, that will be over 50%. So what we're looking at is complete insecurity in the marketplace. And artificial intelligence is going to, together with financial engineering, is part of this mechanism. And there are people who are always defending artificial intelligence is going to create other jobs. But it's interesting that Musk, who thinks that it's a problem, is also supporting inhabitation of Mars, which means underground living. And the efforts to get a biosphere two was completely failure. And the assumption that underground life is tolerable, possible, livable, is a fantasy. And I could dwell upon this, but the ultimate expression of this kind of ideology is done by an Israeli, Yuval Harari. Yuval Harari talks about Dadaism as the new certain form of certainty. If you read his Homo Deus, God-Man, I don't know how to pronounce it in Latin.
Homo Deus.
Homo Deus. It is really shocking. All traditions are dead, and the only thing that's certain, he is not a Gnostic, but he is a transhumanist, which really believes that we can live forever. I mean, Peter Thiel claims he's going to live forever with genetic engineering and so forth. This kind of delusion is typical of the. I've spent most of my summers in the last decade in my deceased wife's island of Icaria in Greece. It's a very rugged island, very beautiful. I think it's paradise. We had a house on the beach, which was incredible. You could look out and see the whole archipelago with Turkey in the background, with Samos next door, 18 kilometers away. And at the end of that, Pharos was a small community of expatriate Israelis who came every year for 5 months because they wanted to retain their land. Joseph had worked for the Muslim groups and knew all the languages. And they sold him a large piece of land in which he built a community that is very famous in Israel as a resistance to the existing situation in Israel. I went back this summer. I discovered that this incredibly critical people had turned into literally Gnostics. They are now thinking themselves as being aggressive Gnostics. I pointed out this means the death of life, the complete acceptance of nihilism. And they say, yeah. And I was aghast, and I interrogated and had to leave before I understood more. But the fact that this kind of consciousness is now emerging is telling us something about the current catastrophe. And with that, I can finish. Instead of, I really think the 5th chapter of her human condition is not really sufficiently understood or appreciated. I think that was prophetic. And Illich told me that you have to love her, but then the but was never completely finished. So I never quite understood his position about art. Who was my colleague and my teacher at the graduate faculty. So just a few reflections that are intended to be provocative.
Thank you very much, Frank. Michael, when I heard that line, I staggered a bit myself. When he said Hannah Arendt was his colleague and teacher. He's just a smidgen older than he looks. He's been around a bit. So that's very provocative. I recall an essay by Arendt which appeared in Between Past and Future, I think it was. One of those 9 essays, The Conquest of Space and the Abolition of Man, where she speaks very stridently, but in a well-crafted essay, very insistently on what you now phrase, I think you've taken the phrase from her, Earth alienation.
Yeah.
The sense of view from nowhere as the condition for the real.
The assumption that the molecular and subatomic structure is the real natural reality which we can use to reconstruct the Earth, which is completely antithetical to the web of life in the biosphere. And if we don't realize that, we are defending a point of view which has to be criticized in the sense that there has to be supplements, there has to be understandings that there's blind spots to this notion of the scientific method. I know so many scientistic people, particularly physicians, particularly ecologists, who are not able to deal with the field studies that we really need to understand the web of life on Earth. The fact that we're ready to go all over the world, all over the universe, and don't understand what's at the bottom of the oceans, to me, is unintelligible. So where are they?
Trent, I wonder if I was talking to Paul Srivastava, the man you wanted to meet from yesterday. This morning I bumped into him walking Pluto. And he said to me, and he's very much involved in matters of ecology and sustainability. He's the man who yesterday said, if the problem is planetary, then we need a planetary solution. But when we were chatting this morning, and I'd like to use that point of reflection to tie the two of you together one more time and see where we can have another second lease on the conversation. He said to me this morning that of the 22 tons of carbon every American accounts for annually, it could be, I forget now whether it's daily or monthly or annually, only 2 is the consequence of personal choices. The vast majority, 20 tons of this thing, is infrastructural. And so if you catapult somebody from Bangladesh into the US, from 2 he'll go to 22. 20. There is no, so I want to use that for a moment as a jumping off point to ask, to begin a reflection on the title of Borremans' second book, There Is No Alternative. And pick up a fragment, I think, Wolfgang, you said it in your talk this morning. You referenced a paper by Illich in German, where he speaks to the question of the we. Trent kept asking today, or just now, we must, we should, we could. And earlier, Dupuis says, unless we are the subject of an enlightened catastrophism, things are not going to be moved. Who is the we for whom there is no alternative? Right? And I wondered if that might be a first opening to a conversation. Please.
I want to respond to Gene again, because I'm really sympathetic with your irritation at Bowman, and me a little bit.
I'm not irritated at you, Carl.
You're the most,
Be irritated.
you're a friendly irritant. I think you're right. We've got to try to do everything we can. And I admire your work and what you're doing. And I'd like to, I'd like to do more of it myself. I try to cut my own carbon footprint and thinking of installing some solar panels on my house. So, but maybe it's just a fault of my personality that I just can't see that it's going to work. I want it to work. I hope it will work. I hope Paul Hawkins right. I mean, what's her name? Amory Lovin's ex-wife.
Hunter.
Hunter Lovins. We've had her at Colorado School of Mines a number of times. In fact, we had Amory Lovins there just to give a big talk about natural capitalism and stuff. Filled the room. I work with a program in humanitarian engineering, trying to look at alternatives. We're trying to make our campus carbon neutral. But when I see what we're up against, it's just do everything I can. But it's hard for me to believe that it's going to work. But you maybe, I hope you're right.
Well, I don't have to be right. I think of a comment that Daniel Berrigan made many years ago when I was at Cornell, and active in the anti-war movement. And his notion was really simple. It was to bear witness.
Yeah.
And so I don't have to be right. I could be wrong, but I'm bearing witness.
Right.
That's all I can do.
Right. Well, and I admire James Hansen for that.
Yeah,
you know?
right.
Chaining himself to the White House fence, saying, look, I got to do something. There's disobedience, civil disobedience, and trying to, and I think Bowman sees his book as a kind of that, a kind of, as Wolfgang says, enlightened doomsaying, but it's a kind of civil disobedience and witness.
I have a story about Amory that goes back to an STS conference which you attended, Trent, back in the 90s. And Amory Lovins gave one of the plenary talks.
Well, these NAST meetings?
Right,
Yeah.
right. And he was really keen at that point on his hypercar. Remember that, Trent? And you asked a question when he was done. And it was, Amory, if we get your hypercar and the cost of traveling drops close to zero, won't we drive more?
Right, there you go.
And there was silence
Yeah.
for like at least 10 or 12 seconds on Amory's part.
Yeah.
He was really flummoxed. And he finally said, I'll leave that to the social scientists to figure out. That's my view of Amory. Has he changed?
No.
No.
I was privileged to listen to, let's say, the women from the South who said that this whole notion of a population threatening the future, I mean, it takes 60 times the amount of resources to socialize an American as against an Indian. So that when you talk about Herman Daly's limits of growth, you're talking about the throughput is the real standard for thinking about sustainability. That's the total consumption of goods and services in a society. If we can reduce the consumption function of life, we can help. And so that's the new argument for a Green New Deal. I mean, you know, I'm just thinking that the referendum in Washington State that denied a carbon tax is evidence of where America is, and the Colorado rejection of a similar kind of fracking control. It tells us that comfort continues to be the meaning of culture and a good life. And so the Green New Deal that, what's her name, from New York, Ocasio-Cortez is arguing for, and Pelosi says, okay, you become the head of a commission on the Green New Deal, which seems to me to be a positive future for thinking about the kind of, I think Herman Daly is really underestimated in his ecological economics. Ecological economics has got to be seen as fundamental to our finite Earth. And I wrote a book called Beyond Western Economics in India that is influenced by Illich and by Gandhi. And it talks about these issues. So,
well, can we ask the question why people like Herman Daly aren't paid more attention? I mean, for example, last year I happened to stumble on him again. Also his organization that he founded. And I looked at the number of hits on any talk that he gave. It was in the low hundreds. This morning I stumbled on a website for the battery technology of what's his name's cars.
Elon Musk.
Elon Musk's cars, right? 1.2 million hits. You know, and the level of attention that people give to the pros and cons of Musk's latest energy technology, battery technology is just phenomenal. I mean, like really detailed technical stuff. I just found the contrast between, let's say, you know, Musk on the one hand and green economics on the other, just profoundly disturbing. It just was really upsetting. So why is it why do we have this discrepancy? I don't know. Does it come back to the starving pigeon? I mean, seriously. I mean, folks in Colorado and folks in, what was the other state you mentioned? Washington, they need jobs. And with the gig economy replacing a lot of our formerly stable work.
You should explain the starving pigeon.
Oh, okay. How many, no, okay. B.F. Skinner, the Skinner box, the pigeon. Well, at another Illich convocation in which he had invited down the author of a new book called Humanist Economics, Lutz, L-U-T-Z, from the University of Maine. It was a frigid session. And by Saturday afternoon, Jean Maubert had really had enough. Jean Maubert. Yes, one of Illich's main colleagues. And after Lutz and his two colleagues made their presentations, Jean Maubert made the following comment. You know, he says, there's an underlying assumption here in your whole approach to humanist economics. And that is, recalling B.F. Skinner, you first have to starve the pigeon.
Yeah.
So anyway, these people in Colorado, in Washington, I mean, these are high maintenance states,
Yes.
right? Unlike Pennsylvania. But you know, we need jobs, and we're not getting them in the normal way anymore. I have an old.
I live in Colorado, so.
Right. Okay. So.
They don't need jobs. We have one of the lowest unemployment rates, I think the second lowest in the country after North Dakota. There's no shortage of jobs.
But then what is it?
What?
And how many jobs do these people have?
It's the fear-mongering of the oil industry.
Well, that's
that everybody who works in the oil industry in Colorado put in their yard a sign that said, "Save our jobs." I work for the oil and gas industry, because they were told that their jobs were going to be lost. They weren't going to be lost. The restriction on fracking was only going to apply to the future, not for the present. So nothing was going to be stopped, except in the future. And they can't find enough workers for the oil fields now. So there's there's just a need for workers in Colorado. So there's no fear of jobs, but it's this fear mongering from the corporations manipulating the public. I mean, there was right 2 doors down from me, there was a person with us, and I went, and I said, what's, you know, I work for the oil and gas industry, so I asked, you know, well, yeah, I was told that we need to, you know, if I want to keep my job, with a double entendre there. You know, if you don't put this in your yard, we're going to let you go. So it's fair.
Well, is there truth in that?
No.
Would they let them?
They might. You might lose. But there's tons of other work. It's not like there's a shortage of jobs.
So let's back up the question. Why do corporations behave that way?
I don't know.
Because they can.
They're trying to starve the pigeons.
and they're succeeding. That's the whole point.
They're succeeding.
Manufacturing starvation.
I mean, I was asking Jean-Pierre to agree again because he said we have to do this fear-mongering in regard to climate change and other really threats in order to wake up the people. And I asked him, why is fear-mongering so easy with reference to a caravan? Why is fear-mongering so easy with the so-called migrant crisis in Europe? Why is it so easy to do fear-mongering with the example you said? And why is it so difficult to have some concern about real dangers?
Unenlightened fear-mongering is always easier than enlightened fear-mongering.
What was Vivian?
Gotta get my arms around that one.
No, but this is too easy, or not? Does that say something about basic anthropological assumption?
Sure.
Yeah.
Tribalism.
Yeah.
Tribalism.
Yeah. So what would that mean? How should we do the fear-mongering for those things where it's really important to do? That we address those people we want to address?
I have it.
Cancer.
We need a committee on truthful fear-mongering.
That sounds boring.
It sounds suspicious to me if we had that committee.
Yes. Can I get David back in? I haven't met you, but I now know your name from David is right? Yeah. Because this relates to, seems to me, to your, a little bit to your question, which I was sympathetic to this morning. What has Illich done at a practical level to promote organizing against power, right? Is that a fair, I mean, that, and it's hard to figure out how a celebration of awareness can help organizing people to resist this fear-mongering that corporations do and that politicians do to be manipulated by them. I don't know the answer to that, but the need for on-the-ground work, I'm not sure what Illich can contribute to that.
Julie.
Yeah, no, I mean, but actually, it's to that point at some level, because I also wanted to bring it back to David's question earlier. As a union organizer, in trying to organize people, one of the things that I've learned over many years, and it's not an easy lesson necessarily, is that organizing through fear does not build a sustainable organization. That's a flash in the pan. You might get some people, you may not, but it doesn't actually accomplish very much. You have to have a positive vision that's going to open the door. But the only way you actually get to a positive vision, and I think this is where it's important for thinking about Illich, both the example that he sets is that it begins in deep relationship. That if I really want to start building something as an organizer, the first thing that I have to go do is spend an awful lot of time with somebody, just getting to know them, what they care about, what they think is important, and figuring out, who they are, and that I care about them and they care about me, and I have to share my story and I want to hear their story, and it's that back and forth, that give and take, that's the beginning of it. Then I think that's where there's a celebration of awareness that can happen between two people who have that kind of a relationship. I think that and we've been talking about this a little bit, that I'm interested in figuring out the theological anthropology the assumptions that are there in Illich, and doing a rereading, but specifically doing a rereading to get back to Tools for Conviviality. Because I think Tools for Conviviality is the one place where Illich tries to not necessarily provide a prescriptive approach, but at least some clear guidelines of what things to avoid and how to provide a lens for how, when two people get together and start trying to articulate a positive vision, what is it that they're going to do, and it's two people looking forward.
Could I say two things at the same time?
I don't know how you're going to do that. Give it a try.
I can't wait. I want to see this.
I hope they're contradictory.
Hope and fear are both irrational adulations of fortune to which we remain vacillating. It vacillates us and deprives us of the trust that we need to do the kind, and to have and cultivate in ourselves the kind of limpid vacancy. Now that's Illich. That's Illich. That's Illich's prayer. This is how he wanted to live, with a limpid, a clear vacans, open to everyone, who is part of our species, and that's every one of us. And I think it's remarkable. I mean, I was scrolling around in Sajay's basement when I found that limpid vacancy. I said, oh my God, the Epicureans would have died to know that.
This is a phrase that we got?
Evans, yeah. I'm sorry I can't reference it. It's all stuck in here, and I can't.
Can I reference Sajay's basement?
Yeah. Garage.
That's more detail. See Sajay's basement.
Primary sources.
But say the beginning again. Because that I think touches a nerve. You said both.
Hope and fear.
Fear is okay. Say the word.
No.
But no hope.
The dialectic of hoping, yet fearing, yet, let's go here. No. Let's go there. No. You have no awareness. You can't be aware if you're being advertised to and standing on your Facebook page. You're always, are they going to this or that? And you have nothing but vacillation. This is fundamental to Spinoza, and Marx understood Spinoza. And I think Marx and Spinoza are great champions of species being. Species being, not abstract universals. That's preposterous. And Marx, as far as I was concerned, was his real contribution was identical to Locke's. On Sunday, for God's sake, you people are working all the time. Have a moment for thought. Now, don't not work. Don't be lazy. It's not an advocacy of laziness. It's an advocacy of the limpid vacancy that I think this is the positive.
Michael, if anybody doubted that a man could say two things at the same time, that doubt has been forever removed. Well done. Please.
Let me express a little concern when you said fear and hope are both emotions. I mean, as I was at this workshop 2 weeks ago, and it was a workshop on apocalypse and hope. And we talked a lot about fear and hope. And one of the participants was a young political scientist who just wrote a very interesting book. Her name is Alison McQueen, and it's Apocalypse and Political Realism, something like that. So in the title there's Apocalypse, and she studies in that book, she treats, with the help of Augustine, the Apocalypse of John, and then has a chapter on Machiavelli, on Hobbes and Mondau. And she referred first of all to a very interesting, so she makes the claim in our days concerning those matters, fear is more important than hope. And then she quotes a very interesting observation already by Aristotle, because Aristotle said, without fear, so you need, fear leads to deliberation. Fear leads to deliberation, but without hope, there is no deliberation. So if you, in hopeless cases, you don't do.
Well, that's a fusion of them, but it's not a worship of fortune.
I just wanted to say, hope is a very, fear and both are very complicated. Very complicated. We have cases of fear-mongering that are very dangerous, and we know all of them. On the other side, there are fears we have really to monger in some way or to stoke. And with hope, the author I was addressing there a little bit, and he's also very profound in on those questions, is a Catholic philosopher, Joseph Pieper, a German Catholic philosopher who is over there, quite forgotten, but he is very widely read still in the bookstores and so in the United States. And in Pieper you can find profound hope and trivial hope or cheap hope. So if you,
like cheap grace.
Because hope is of course one of the three theological virtues. So it's a very important thing, and I think for me, I read that a little bit, and that's what I said to Jean-Pierre Dupuis, we should not give up hope. So there must be some hope that it's not everything can be done by us. And the interesting thing is, I mean, there are Christians, of course, who are very much into hope in a very dangerous way. Those are those Christians, and I don't think, or it would be a danger to interpret Illich in that way, that we say, well, God will provide anyway for us, and He will save at least the small rest of the really good people. So, you know, the whole left behind thing and the car bumpers where said, watch out, driver may disappear immediately. So there is a kind of very strong Christian, evangelical, fundamentalist emphasis on hope, who are also not concerned about climate change at all, because they said, well, we trust in Jesus and He will save us anyway, and so why should we be concerned? So this would be a very bad way of life.
Yeah. Spinoza would call that superstition.
Yeah, right. And but then there is hope, and there is a book by Joseph Pieper. It's called The End of Time. He wrote that in '45 concerning the nuclear danger, and he makes clear that a profound Christian attitude is, you do everything as if it depends on really only us, but with that there goes a hope together that if it's not possible, we are not lost. We are, so we as Christians we can trust, but that this does not mean we long to go into heaven immediately or so. I mean, all the traditions, of course, say this life on this earth is not the last one, but also forbid suicide. So that means that's the emphasis of people, that the people with profound hope said. Bonhoeffer's example, he said that too. We do everything to protect the world. We are concerned for the life here and now, as it is by Illich. And if there is the last judgment, then we stop working because then it's over, but not a minute before. Or the famous saying by Luther, even if the world would be destroyed tomorrow, I plant the apple tree today. So this kind of, so I read, or I think we should think about Illich when he emphasizes so strongly to trust in grace and to be open and not taking up planning, this hope dimension that has to go together with a reckoning with the apocalypse.
Yes.
So roughly, I mean, one needs to work stronger what are bad hopes, what are good
Yes.
hopes, what are bad fears, what are good.
Shelley has the line at the end of Prometheus Unbound, which goes, to hope, till hope create from its own wreck the thing it contemplates.
David.
I think those contribution, we're talking about fear and hope, catastrophes. Illich's contribution to me is the awareness, and he pursued the correct idea. Okay. And I'll give you a personal kind of story and get back to this point. I lived in Harrisburg when the 3 Mile Island accident happened back in the 70s. Right out of school, we had a newborn. And so the community had fear because we heard all kind of rumors and some doctors were saying this, that, and the other. So you had the company, you had the Nuclear Regulatory Agency, and I can't remember all of the actors, and then you had the industry, where they had 40 or 50 plants around the country and they had to come out of this military industrial complex and such. And Illich was one of the intellectuals who gave this broad community, all these different circles of people, workers and teachers and state workers, whatever, he gave us a way to analyze the organization, the setup of this system of energy. And the community split right down the middle. You had some who worked in the industry. They said, this is my job, and I'm not developing any scabs or scales or anything from this leak. We had some farmers who split. Some farmers said they lost animals, that was related to these fumes and vapors and whatever that was coming out. And what I got from that, and I was doing oral history at the time, I was a historian, and we were interviewing workers. And Herbert Aptheker said something years ago when I was an undergrad. He said that the power system controls the means of persuasion, whether it's the New York Times or the university curriculums or whatever. They are shaping the minds of the masses. So you have Illich, who was an independent thinker, and his books on medical nemesis and deschooling, it gave us all kind of like cognitive, how can I say, grasp of the powers that were at play at this time. So I'm just giving you all that personal story to bring out the strength of Illich's views, the usefulness of it. But you can't just have awareness. You can't just have collective fear or collective hope. It has to be disseminated through the entire hierarchy of the real world. Now in Harrisburg, the hierarchy of the real world were the housewives, the people who worked at the plant. You had blue collar, you had engineers, technical guys and gals, managers. You had, again, high school teachers who were worried about this stuff coming into the high schools, and they were sitting there getting exposed. So I guess what I wanted to get from Illich, and I didn't get it in the area of the political system, is the kind of analysis that he did with the hospitals and schools, the agricultural development and such. So that's kind of like going all around and getting back to maybe Carl's question about what could have Illich have done with his great mind, maybe to go another step in terms of protecting us as we exhibit awareness and resisting the questions as we're doing it, or helping us kind of use our awareness to be proactive against the system. You don't have to suffer to know that these horrors out there. Whether it's the Yemen situation or the shooting people, just coming out of the mall, we just happen to be. So this is why I never get enough of Illich, but I do wish that he had another about 10 years.
One more book.
But the unions used to do this dissemination of awareness in the union halls, and in the union newspapers, and in the union organizers. But when you wipe that out, and like Illich said, you have schools have an inner curriculum. Once you get the schools kind of reorganized, and you can set up a charter school or something. People are still over-influenced by the old system. So he was able to even show that, and like someone said earlier, he would get to a paradox and go beyond that and tell you, by the way, you're going to fall into another trap, and you're going to fall into that. So he took us deep into the intellectual understanding, but he didn't, he wasn't he didn't give us I believe in fair analysis of hope. You get your hope from your analysis that you're on the right track. But just having right on your side is not going to win it for you.
Can I say a word here? This partly continues our conversation this morning. In the writings of the early 70s, Ivan makes a distinction between political revolution and cultural revolution, which he also called institutional revolution. And he argued, as Wolfgang did this morning with the example of the Nicaraguan revolution, which returns to where it started, that political revolutions do tend to return to where they started. We've seen it in our own time repeatedly. So that was the basis of his argument, that cultural revolution is the untried road. But it's not unpolitical, I don't think. And I think maybe that's because we don't take seriously enough the institutions that he attempted to draw within limits, or to analyze and draw within limits. So, that leads me, by a bit of a leap, to the importance of awareness, because awareness is not getting a good rap here. As if, sure, awareness, that's great, but, that's like power, right? Let's take it to the man right now. But I think awareness, or that wonderful limpid vacancy as well, should come in. Awareness is more than just, here I am having such a nice time. It's really, I'll take another leap. It seems to me that Ivan is trying to track certainties back to their origins. And that was the project of the second half of his career. So how do we get the idea of scarcity, right? And the ultimate certainty is rooted in the incarnation, right? As incorporated in the church, the institution of salvation, the institution that is salvation, that is itself the kingdom, and which bequeaths that then to all these other ersatz forms of salvation in which we live now and in which we believe. So ultimately, he's a critic of our religion. He doesn't particularly, or at any length, engage the question of Christianity as religion or not religion. He does, at one point, make the statement that belief in the incarnate Word is not and cannot be a religion. So that is one way of looking at cryptio optimi pessima. It's just that it is the making of what cannot be a religion into a religion. But we also know that religion is the only sure form of prohibition that will actually rein in human beings. I don't know if that's an acceptable statement. I'm a little bit over my head here. But this, in the past, René Girard defines religion as prohibition and sacrifice. It is people...
That's the sacred.
So our problem, let's say, is in our religion, although we don't recognize it as our religion because it's moved into these ostensibly secular institutions which we don't recognize as religious. But Illich, I think, is making possible a new religion, which will not be a religion. And you find this paradox shot through all the postmodern thinkers. Derrida has his religion without religion, Carney has his religion after religion, or I don't know. Everyone has their formula about how to have religion without having religion. But obviously, all are thinking about this question of how to have the effect of religion without having religion. And I think that is where the problem lies. And I think Illich is pertinent to that. Now, if you stand with this in the horizon of prediction, like we have so many years, I don't know. It's going to take more years than the horizon of prediction allows. You know, this 4 degrees temperature increase by the end of the century, whatever. That's a pretty short horizon for the kind of change one is talking about in human understanding. Maybe there will be few who will achieve it, but that seems to me important, that ultimately he is about the religion that we ought to have had but didn't have and might have. So awareness in that sense is no small thing, it's no trivial thing, it's the ultimate thing. Yeah. So let me stop there.
Concerning Schroyer, that's maybe a little bit the difficulty, maybe a certain kind of nemesis, meaning self-limiting religion or limiting religion. I would say the traditional concept of religion that Schroyer called the sacred, this is prohibition and sacrifice. The sacred religion.
Right.
Because Schroyer is also not so much into religion, so his seminal book on that question was Violence et le Sacré, Violence and the Sacred. So he's talking about the sacred. But just because what I'm working in Princeton now is I am trying to unfold Schroyer's late distinction between the sacred and the holy.
Yes.
And this, I mean, the critique of religion in Illich probably has something to do also with Barth, because just I read a chapter in it where he praises Karl Barth, and Karl Barth was also, and Bonhoeffer got it probably from Barth, very critical of religion, because he said religion is our projection, what we would like to have. It's idolatry. So Barth was completely against religion, which doesn't mean he was not believing in God. Or
he said it was a yoke. Yeah. He says that's a beautiful expression.
Religion as a yoke.
A yoke,
yeah.
but we must wear it.
Yeah. So
Barth never says that we can avoid wearing the yoke.
Right.
So to say he's against religion
he was very
simplifies a little bit the fact that we wear this yoke. We must wear this yoke.
Yeah.
All we can have is understanding.
I'm not sure about that. But
that's how I understand his word.
In general, he saw in religion the human longing, the human idolatrous longing. And if you look at Schroyer carefully, and I think that chimes to some way with what I quickly scanned in a book about Illich, because in this chapter on religious and aesthetic experience, he very strongly emphasizes and reflects on our call, on everybody's call to seek holiness. And holiness is probably not prohibition, because prohibition means that the problem with prohibition is human beings, if we understand human beings, we always want more. So if you open Charles Taylor's book, Secular Age, he tries to define this religious longing that he says human beings are long for more. And I think this is a very characteristic element of being a human, and one you cannot extinguish. So prohibitions, of course, try to prevent this kind of longing, but it's a little bit against...
I may have misspoken myself. I did not intend to recommend a new set of prohibitions under a religious aegis. I'm saying that is what religion has done.
Yeah, okay.
Right? We don't dig up the earth here because God has told us we don't dig up the earth here.
Yeah.
I don't mean that can be reinstituted.
Yeah, but today I think Illich was pointing at that. Today we need a true seeking of holiness,
yes,
which probably gives us a little bit a taste of this more. which does not need to buy a better car and more consumer goods, which is also in this direction, but
And which is falling,
yeah.
as Ivan says,
Yeah.
because this isn't going to fight the power. Come on, get serious.
I just wanted that
That's-
you
that
do not understand it in a way that we could go back. I think we cannot go back.
No, I don't either.
Yeah, yeah.
Not at all.
Sorry.
You could go ahead.
Please, please do.
I have a couple of stories to tell about the other economic summit. The other economic summit, TOES. In 2000, we had spent a hell of a lot of time organizing this big event. We brought Lula and all kinds of people from all over the world. We had thousands of people ultimately. But the day before the event, Texas threatened the black college we were going to have it with eliminating their money. I called Ivan. He called this is real power. He called a oil billionaire widower. The next morning we had the Astrodome Hotel. The next morning, and we were saved.
This is in 2000? Did you say 2000?
Yeah. No, not 2000, but what was it, 1990?
1990,
right. I'm thinking of Illich's death. Thousands of people came. Thousands of people came 7 years later in Denver. But when we organized it in Sea Island, Georgia, George Bush created unbelievable interventions. Georgia had suspended all the schools. They had put words out that the hippies were going to defecate on the lawns. They had, in every side street, there were huge numbers of police. They had rolling road blocks, which was 12 cars, and they'd stop. And we got 75 people at the biggest event. And I had invited Walter Wink, who was engaging the powers, has a lot of power in the South. And he did a very good job of showing the power of religion for change. I wrote up an article on this event, TOES in Georgia, and then talking about the police state that was created. I couldn't get it published. I couldn't get it published in The Nation. I couldn't get it published in These Times and other left magazines. And I had to go to India, and Walter Wink took it, and I said, look, change it. Get it published, because documentation of this police state is real important. He couldn't get it published either. It tells you something about American left. They don't believe that we really had a police state at that point, but we did. I mean, I've never published the article. And if anyone wants a copy, I'll have a copy sent.
Yes.
It's really incredible. So what those two stories tell you, I don't know, but they're my history.
Sajay, can you merge emails for?
Yes, I will send you.
Okay.
Circulating. Any, everybody seems to be looking at me. Is that a sign of collective exhaustion? Is it time to...
Let me just read because a quote from Walter Wink, because you just mentioned it, and maybe we can react and say, is this against or...
Speak louder, please.
He's going to give you read a quotation from Walter Wink, because you mentioned it in the presentation.
And when I came up this morning, I was reminded of a very interesting insight by Walter Wink that I read in February or so. So it's the following.
It's extraordinary how quickly you can pick up things from your phone. Yeah. Earlier this morning, you found a long passage on your phone. This machine is extraordinary.
Yeah. So it's in Walter Wink's book, Engaging the Powers, Discernment and Resistance in a World of Domination, he writes the following. This is the politics of this is the politics of hope. This is the politics of hope. Hope envisages its future and then acts as if that future is now irresistible, thus helping to create the reality for which it longs. Should I repeat it?
Yeah.
That's exactly what Shelley, that's exactly what Shelley
That's what Shelley said. Yep.
So for me it's interesting, first of all, maybe it's very close to what Illich said. If you live the kingdom now, the kingdom is among you, and it's not something you postpone or put in fantasy. But when I read that, I was immediately reminded of Dupuis' Enlightened Doomsaying. No, in some way it's the same structure, because Enlightened Doomsaying says, and he got that from Anders, make the catastrophe of the future present in order to create resistance against this dangerous future. So that's the loop.
That's a real
It's the same.
Yes.
But in the case of Dupuis, there's the problem, if it would really absolutely happen in this way, you would be fatalistically say, well, then let's drink the last cask of wine and beer because we can nothing do. But Wink has the same structure, so if you want to have a good future, make the future present now. And when I read Illich, those passages now quite quickly, I thought it's very close to that, right? When he says we can think about the church in the past, we can live the church in the present, keep away the fingers of the future. But Wink makes the same claim without saying don't touch the future. He says make the future present.
It's an interesting question of whether it's the same structure vis-a-vis Dupuis, same structure or inverse structure. And second question is, by collapsing the future into the present, whether you still have the future. So even Wink, who says, live now as if it is tomorrow. The tomorrow is no more. So there's you come close to Illich.
But what is the collapse?
And didn't Illich quoted the Walter Benjamin and the Klee drawing of the angel facing the past, and everything is being destroyed, right? And that's the only future we have is the onrushing preteritism of the moment, and that's onrushing, and that's the little Klee passage that I think it's a mechanical reproduction, the age of mechanical reproduction.
The thesis on the philosophy of history.
Yes, that's what it is. Yes. Thank you.
But that wind is blowing from paradise.
Yes!
It's piling up all the debris.
Yes!
Which is also very illustrative, I think.
That's it. And you get Michael Series' malfeasance. It's all the shit.
I think talk of angels and winds from paradise are an appropriate figure and image on which to close the afternoon's deliberations. Yes? All are invited home because we're getting a lot of Indian food. I can't vouch for degrees of spice in it. But feel free to join us in about, Samar, what do you think? In about half an hour, 40 minutes? So houses.